Hey, this is Rick Brandenburg for Turf Bugs and Rock and Roll, and over the next few weeks I want to talk to you about a couple of subjects that hopefully will get your interest, and maybe they're a little bit controversial. Right now I want to talk about what's the winter weather going to do to insect problems this spring and summer, and maybe next week or so we'll talk about whether or not you think dealers are going to stop selling glyphosate or Roundup because they're afraid of being sued over the potential negative effects that seem to be permeating the airwaves these days. So first I want to talk about the winter weather. Everybody likes to talk about the weather and the impact it has on them, their lives, and their heating bills and everything else. And let's talk about what we can expect after this winter from a perspective of when and where and how much we'll see insect problems. So here's the general rule that I've learned after about 40 years of doing this. Does a colder winter mean you're going to have fewer insects? No. Does a warmer winter going to mean you're going to have more insects? No. Does a warmer winter mean you're going to have insects earlier in the spring? No. Does a cooler winter mean they're going to be later? No. I know some of my colleagues will disagree with that, and there are a few exceptions, but as a general rule, it has been really difficult to establish any sort of pattern of insect problems following a cold or a warm winter that I've seen over the course of my career. Basically, you've got insects that have amazing adaptability. They can survive really cold temperatures, and when it's really warm, sometimes it's not really warm enough to make a difference from the insect perspective. It's still cool temperatures, and there's a lot of variation. I know this winter, for those of you north of me and living in Raleigh, North Carolina, and the Northeast and Midwest, you've had a really cold, in many cases a really snowy winter. And it's been a tough one. For us here in the Southeast, it's been a very wet winter, but it's been unusually warm for us, and things are, flowers and things seem to be ahead of schedule. But they're really, I'm not going to say we're going to have worse insect problems, we're going to have them earlier because we've had a wet, mild winter. Nor am I going to say in the Midwest they're not going to have any insect problems or they're going to be less. Look, insects are going to be there, they're still going to try to eat your lunch. So here's what I found over the years. That really the temperatures in the spring are going to have a much greater impact on what the insects are going to do that summer. If you have, for example, with mole crickets, if you have a dry spring, they're going to be later. If you have a wet spring, they're going to be earlier, independent of air temperature. Completely independent. We've got a lot of information on this, and when it's wet they're going to be early because it promotes egg laying. When it's dry they're going to be late because it delays egg laying. Has nothing to do with winter temperatures and really has very little to do with even springtime temperatures. But for us in North Carolina, the time and urgency for insect problems most often is determined late March and early April, whether it's warm or cool or whatever, not what happens December, January, and February. Now there are some exceptions. For example, the annual bluegrass weevil is really driven by temperatures. And in areas of the Northeast, they can really monitor this with degree days. We have it in North Carolina in the mountains, but we have found that the degree days really don't work very well with the situation we have with the latitude and things on annual bluegrass weevils. So we've not been able to really forecast it or predict it at all, although we do know that warmer temperatures cause it to happen early. So it's different for every pest, but as a general rule, a wet winter does not mean you're going to have fewer insects and they're going to be later. A warm winter does not mean you're going to have more insects and they're going to be earlier. It's really, they're somewhat independent of that, and it's all going to happen with what happens in the spring. And with bugs like fall armorworms, they've got to migrate north every year, so it's all going to depend on storm patterns and that sort of thing as to when they show up and how many of them show up. So don't get freaked out if you've been in an area that's had a mild winter, and don't get too confident if you've been in an area that's had a cold winter that you're not going to have any problems. Nature takes care of itself. They'll show up when they show up. The best thing you can do is make sure you're out there checking and watching on websites that try to predict or forecast and report observations of these pests. Hope that helps. Look forward to seeing you again soon.